Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 2 of Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs. It's a really interesting book, and I've got to say, this isn't my opinion, but it does kind of fit in line with my research of the Celtic tribes, the so-called Exodus, Israeli tribes, when in fact I think it was Celtic tribes. And the Romans, I feel, discovered this religion the Celts had and morphed it into their own, which turned out to be Christianity. But I think Christianity has its roots in the Celtic people. Anyway, like I said, I don't agree with all the opinions, and I've listened to a podcast to the author and he believes in giants and stuff like that, and I'm still quite sceptical about the whole giant theory. Anyway, like I said, moving on to the book. Chapter 2, The Parasitical Elite. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Goethe, or Goethe, I don't know that name, must be one of these Greek philosophers. Anyway, my first encounter with an obscure class of people, the parasitical elite, was through the writings of Dr. Frank R. Wallace. He is originator of a new set of techniques for thinking, neotech, that reveals never before known facts about a controlling elite he labels as mystics and neo-cheats. Neo-cheaters are unnatural people who drain everyone. The parasitical elite class live by usurping values produced by others for their own use. Their survival requires deceptive neo-cheating. A serious study of this system allowed me to identify for myself a parasitical class that devour values created by others. In fact, we all live unnatural lives to varying degrees because our foundations are built upon a matrix of deceptions. The parasitical elite, who are so well camouflaged, is almost impossible for most of people to identify them, forfeit their humanity as a result of the mayhem and death they intentionally visit on their fellow man. The methods they use are, for the most part, unseen because they have hypnotized us into believing what they do is for the greater good. A discovery that shocks me to my core is how we are all unwitting accomplices of the scheming hierarchy these humanoids serve, which turns us into slaves of their mind-numbing illusions. It is only the highest echelons of the parasitical elite that are fully conscious of and directing the agenda. As a point of interest, this information will be useful to us later. The ancient Israelis associated El, a singular noun, the plural of which is Elohim, the early gods of Canaan, with the planet Saturn. It also corresponds to the Egyptian god Horus, one of the gods represented in the forthcoming ritual battle. We find it generally ascribed to words that refer to a higher power, such as elect, elders, elevated. The Israeli god Be'el, Bethel, the house of God, Allah, and so on. It also completes the Trinity in Israel. Is representing Isis, the mother goddess, Ra, the father god, and El, Saturn, the son of Horus. One of the greatest avatars, little known outside esoteric circles, was named Moriah El Hu, according to Rosicrucian records, initiated both Jesus and Zechariah into the mysteries. It was he who introduced the mystical symbolism of baptism to the world. Jordan Maxwell, who made a lifelong study of ancient secret societies and the elite that founded them, believes they are the hidden rulers of the world. Maxwell, who also includes a study of the ancient gods they worshipped, which chillingly indicates a spiritual dimension to their exploitation, has this to say about the occult importance of Saturn, which he equates with the god El. Now, I mentioned before there were 4 gods, but I only mentioned 3, so I'm going to go back over the 4th again. The 4 again. There was the stellar god, the lunar god, and the solar god, and then, of course, we had Saturn. Saturn is a very interesting 4th god that is kind of hidden in the scriptures. However, the more you get into the scriptures and check out the words and the phrases, you begin to see the words that have to do with Saturn. That is why today, when you get married before God, and the symbol of that god is a ring that is put on each other's fingers, the ring of Saturn. In the marriage phrases, one also begins to see what has to do with Saturn. So when you get married with a ring, and the symbol of that god is the ring of Saturn. You're wearing God's ring, but to get back to Saturn being the ancient god El, it was called the Ugaritic god, or the Syrian Ugaritic god, which is what we call today Palestine. The northern area of Palestine was Syria, and was associated with the god's name El. The colour associated with Saturn is black, the reason, according to Maxwell, that judges, priests and graduates wear black, and also the reason we exchange rings, evocative of the rings of Saturn, during a marriage ceremony. Maxwell proposes that the foregoing is indicative of a primeval worship of Saturn through a 6,000-year-old secret society called the Saturnalia Brotherhood. Coincidentally, the highest degrees within the Orange Order, of whom we will be hearing more later, are colloquially called the Black or the Royal Black Knights of the Camp of Israel, to give them their full title. To conclude our introduction to the hidden elite, who we have indicated are the real controllers of society, we call Senator William Fulbright, former chairman of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, at a 1963 symposium, The Elite and the Electorate, is government by the people possible? He concludes, the case for government by elites is irrefutable, implying that government by the people is not possible. Let us now have a look at some of the voluminous evidence that explains how this control happened. Through dynastic marriages, oligarchic families merge and often change their names, sometimes for political reasons, and other times to cover something they would prefer us to remain ignorant about. The present House of Windsor, previously the Germanic House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, as a useful example. It might be said that the House of Hanover still reigns in Britain today, although it was renamed Saxe-Coburg-Gotha after the Victorian era. Later in 1917, Britain's House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha was renamed yet again to Windsor, to veil its German heritage during the First World War, writes Lawrence Gardner in his foreword to the book The Forgotten Monarchy of Scotland, see below. This has the result of making life difficult for researchers trying to identify specific individuals as controllers of the system. Many have tried with varying degrees of success, but it is easier and more effective to identify the dynastic houses of the enigmatic oligarchy rather than one individual. The most important houses amongst the plutocracy at present are the houses of Rothschild, Windsor, Schiffs and Orange. See Appendix 1. Many researchers maintain that some of these families are covertly Rothschild bloodlines or, at the very least, under their permeating control. As long as a matrix of houses exists, the parasitical system of power blocks, it is comparatively easy to replace an individual. They are conveniently plugged into an already existing structure. Occasionally a gifted individual is born into a family to influence its fate. A prime example of this is the financial genius Nathan Meyer Rothschild, of whom Niall Ferguson wrote. Historians have never adequately explained how an obscure Jewish merchant banker, who only a few years before had been a smuggler and a few years before that a minor textile exporter, was able to become the principal conduit of money from the British government to the continental battlefields on which the fate of Europe was decided in 1814 and 1815. Of all the steps in the ascent of the House of Rothschilds, this was surely the greatest, yet also the least understood. Nathan Rothschild, as briefly explained earlier, reputedly captured the London stock market for his house. This was possible because of the Rothschilds' unrivaled courier service that allowed him to be the first to receive news of the outcome at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The anecdote goes back when he received this crucial news. He went directly to the London stock market, took up his usual place beside the favourite pillar, named the Rothschild pillar to this day, and along with his agents began selling. Naturally, when the other brokers saw this, they assumed Wellington had been defeated and they too started dumping their shares, which resulted in the bottom falling out of the bond market. When Rothschild decided the time was right, he instructed his agents, through cryptic signals, to start buying. They bought the stock back at ridiculously low prices, following which the news came through that Wellington had been victorious, resulted in the prices regaining their previous value and more. The House of Rothschild had effectively captured the London stock market. We cannot estimate how many Wattus and Rembrandts, how many thoroughbreds in his descendants' stables the man by the pillar won that single day. Although they have always denied the story, it is now an integral part of the mythology of the Rothschild family. Reading between the lines of the description of the system of houses, we find a clue to the convenience marriage of Diana and Charles that introduced a bloodline Stuart into the House of Windsor. Sometimes dynasties feel the bloodline within their houses needs to be strengthened, made lawful according to their own protocols, and this is what happened in the case of Diana. She was, through the Spencer family, of the bloodline of the House of Stuart, the ancient and lawful line of Scots-Irish, British kings and queens. Now her sons, William and Harry, are inheritors of the Stuart bloodline and the Windsor dynasty. This convenient and some believe contrived arrangement strengthened the claim of the House of Windsor to the lawful ruling house of the United Kingdom. An example will help clarify the difference between the bloodlines and the houses, which, although very subtle, demonstrates why the latter is more significant. The direct Stuart bloodline apparently still exists because James had a son with his second wife, Mary Beatrice, called James III, the Old Pretender, which established a direct bloodline to the present. This bloodline supposedly manifests today in the person of Prince Michael, 7th Count of Albany, who claims to be senior legal descendant of the Stuart kings of Britain. His claim received support from a little-known group of royals called the European Council of Princes. Some 32 sovereign houses openly proclaimed the continuing de jure Scots monarchy to an international audience. Prince Michael's claim could be well legitimate, but the ruling royal house of the Stuarts ceased to exist with the demise of Queen Mary II, King William III, and Queen Anne, who died in 1714. It matters not a jot to the incumbent house if there are legal descendants of the Stuarts, since their house no longer had any political clout. It would be an almost impossible task for an individual, de jure or no, to depose a strongly entrenched ruling house such as the Windsors for the simple reason they were and are of the bloodline, as Prince Michael has discovered. In any case, most researchers tell us the true bloodline runs through the female. That being so, the pure blood Stuarts, to reiterate, ended with the death of Anne, leaving the claim by Prince Michael, even if lawful, looking rather feeble. To conclude, as King and Beveridge does, that Diana was a threat to the British House of Windsor because of her bloodline, and presumably the reason for her alleged assassination, is as absurd. If she had ever attempted to regain the throne for her house, it would have split the country. Until the advent of neotech, it was difficult for any researcher to produce credible evidence that illustrates the power these dynasties wield. Most of the proof was anecdotal and, as is usual, hidden in plain sight. Another difficulty investigators face is the capacity of their audience to comprehend the control these plutocratic houses have over the illusionary mind, created system we all help to construct and sustain. It is just as problematic to believe that there is a relatively small group of powerful individuals who have exploited historical records and relegated a major symbolic event to that of a minor battle to suit some nefarious agenda. Most people will dismiss any explanation about the oligarchic family's system of control as a figment of an overactive imagination. This is no accident. The deception has been brilliantly conceived and executed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Cast your mind back over the centuries, you will find that anyone who challenged the status quo, from Akhenaten to Socrates, killed for teaching freedom to the youth of his time, Jesus killed for teaching love, and Gandhi killed for teaching peace and independence. As Morpheus explains, I won't lie to you, Neil. Every single man or woman who has stood their ground, everyone who has fought an agent, the status quo, has died. Anyway, if it were the case of an overactive imagination, then it seems there are many otherwise intelligent and credible people with this problem. Some uncommonly brave souls have suffraged from time to time in politics and the media to attempt to shed light on this shadowy elite, and occasionally they aid their own exposure for strategic purposes. No matter what you think about these quirky ideas, there is copious documentary evidence to show that there is something extraordinary happening behind the curtains of society. If we can shake ourselves out of our stupor, we may become aware of an irrational parasitical structure we are so hopelessly trapped in and have been for a long time. The following facts may convince you that the great dynastic houses are powerful enough to hide behind the gatekeepers of a system that has been refined and perfected to such an extent that we fool ourselves into believing it was intended for our benefit. your own conclusions if you take heed to the voice of your inner self, the voice of God, about what is being revealed here concerning these oligarchic dynasties will be more surprising and shocking than any explanation from me or anyone else. No one can tell you about the Matrix. You have to see it for yourself, explains Morpheus. The Buddha agrees. Don't believe anything, not even what I tell you, unless it agrees with your own common sense. Authors Nesta Webster and Jordan Maxwell are examples of those that have tried, with varying levels of success, to expose the elite's raison d'etre. However, no one, as of this date, has exposed it fully. Nevertheless, an examination of their research will be a good place to begin, because most of other researchers in this area arrived at similar conclusions. Webster demonstrates with reasoned dexterity that there is more going on behind the respectable facade of government and the financial establishment than the ordinary person, even in their wildest dreams, could imagine. This is the reason a lot of this information has been put out in fantasy form. Alice in Wonderland, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, and Indiana Jones, to name a few. Webster's books, originally published in the 1950s and 60s, are an exceptional source of information for further research, as are Maxwell's, but discernment should always be shown regarding some of their conclusions, because things are not always as they appear in this inverted civilization. Webster cites many eminent authorities in government and commerce, it would be thought, have a more informed view of religio-political world events. Religion and commerce are inextricably linked than the rest of us. Below are a few examples of Webster's study that leads us into the murky and shadowy world of the so-called conspiracy theorist. There is in Italy a power which we seldom mention in this house. I mean the secret societies. It is useless to deny, because it is impossible to conceal, that the great part of Europe, the whole of Italy and France, and the great portion of Germany, to say nothing of other countries, is covered with a network of these secret societies, just as the superficies of the earth is now being covered by railroads. And what are their objects? They do not attempt to conceal them. They do not want constitutional government. They do not want ameliorated institutions. They want to change the tenure of land, to drive out the present owners of the soil, and to put an end to ecclesiastical establishments. Some of them may go further. Disraeli in the House of Commons, July the 14th, 1856. We are actually witnessing an immense revolutionary movement, of which the first outward manifestation was the French Revolution of 1789. This movement, which since then has spread all over the world, has a much deeper significance than is generally supposed, and aims at the overthrow of civilization. The fate of humanity is at stake, and it is of great importance for us to know the causes of the movement and its consequences, or, in a word, to know where we are going. Vicomte Leon de Ponkins, Foreword to the Secret Powers Behind Revolution. We find the secret power behind the world revolutionary movement today doing exactly what the original clique did within the lodges of continental European Freemasonry, 1733 to 1789. Commander W.G. Carr, Canadian Intelligence Officer, World War II, 1957. When interviewing a member of a very powerful secret society, she was informed about a mysterious and nefarious order that consumed other less powerful ones. I have been convinced that we, as an order, have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic, that is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. Webster does make an effort to remain unbiased when she writes, "Let it be said once and for all, secret societies have not always been for evil purposes. On the contrary, many have arisen from the highest aspirations of the human mind, the desire for a knowledge of eternal verities. Arcane records state the Templars, especially, began to realize that their organizations had become narrowly sectarian. These records go on to say, because the Church had to come to look upon itself as the protector of the Templars and would pick people they wanted within its ranks, with basic qualifications being ignored. The order countered this by organizing these unqualified candidates as the outer circle. Once again, we see anything of worth in a violent debt-based anti-civilization being routinely undermined by the parasitical elite and finally becoming corrupt. Jordan Maxwell puts forward powerful hypothesis which reveals the more modern aspects of an historical conspiracy. In the 11th report, State Investigations Committee on Education, published in 1953 by the California State Senate, it talks about the Illuminati. So-called modern communism is apparently the same hypocritical and deadly world conspiracy to destroy civilization that was founded by the secret order of Illuminati in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776, and that raised its hoary head here in our colonies at a critical period before the adoption of our federal constitution. The World Revolution conspiracy appears to have been so well organised and ever continuing to be ever on the alert to take advantage of every opportunity presenting itself, or that the conspirators could create. It is significant in this connection that as early as 1783, when unsettled conditions and dissatisfaction in some quarters had arisen in the American colonies, subversive anonymous sermons were circulating among the colonial army to incite dissatisfaction and rebellion. George Washington immediately called the army together and addressing them used a significant language, remembering that this is 1783. George Washington, when addressing the army, states, "My God, what can this writer have in view by recommending such measures? Can he be friend to the army? Can he be a friend to this country? Rather, is he not an insidious foe? Some missionary, perhaps, from New York?" In the next paragraph, the California State Senate report continues, "It is plain that George Washington believed that then the center of the secret conspiracy, so far as his country was concerned, was to be located in the city of New York." After the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, which is neither federal or has it any reserves, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., whose son later became the famous aviator, is on record declaring to Congress, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this act, the invisible government, by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation." American President Woodrow Wilson acknowledged that the passing of the Federal Reserve Act had its consequences. "We have become one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world, a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." He continues to reflect in this vein in his book, The New Freedom. "Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." British Prime Minister and skillful orator Winston Churchill echoes Wilson's concerns when, on January 26, 1932, he declared, "The progress of the world is dependent on eminent individuals. It has never been ground out by political machines. It is a great delusion to think that the people have the kind of government that they want. They have the kind of government that they are told they want." In other of his incisive commentaries, Churchill leaves no doubt where he stands as to his perception of an international conspiracy. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Belacan, Rosa Luxemburg and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played, as a modern writer, Miss Webster, has so ably shown, a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. In international religio-politics, knowledge of a secret government and their systems of control is so commonplace that it would need a separate volume to record all references to them. We discovered in the last chapter how the money changers usurped the British Empire. It follows that our elected leaders must have extensive knowledge of this sinister web of control. However, in the face of such an insidious power, democratically elected representatives are, alarmingly, utterly impotent. But wait a minute, we have a crusade in media. Would they not revel in such an amazing scoop if they were one? We have already seen that many prominent people believe world governments are controlled by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men, of whom another British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, said, "The governments of the present day have to deal not merely with the governments, with emperors, kings and ministers, but also with the secret societies which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents, and can at the last moment upset all the government's plans." Could this control include all of the media? Impossible. You may have to reconsider as we are drawn deeper into the matrix. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper, before 24 hours my occupation would be gone. The business of journalists is to destroy the truth, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for their daily bread. We are the tools and vessels for the rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. John Swinton, former Chief of Staff, New York Times, New York Press Club, 1953. However, this reference, which appears whenever researchers are trying to expose sycophantic sections of the establishment's media, is, according to Robert Anton Wilson, a hoax. He writes, "The New York Press Club denies that such a speech was ever given, and the New York Times never heard of John Swinton. In short, this quote is a fake. It is included here to show how myth and fact are easily entangled and how red herrings are strewn into the path of unwary researchers. Fortunately, if Wilson is right, there is copious evidence to show the media is controlled by a plutocracy. Independent investigative journalist John King uncovered a network of reporters in the employ of the CIA, which he proposes in part of the ancient conspiracy. In 1977, for example, renowned Washington Post journalist Carl Bernstein, famous for exposing the Watergate scandal, which finally impeached President Nixon, revealed that there are more than 400 journalists in the US alone who are either deep cover CIA agents or they are on the CIA payroll. He insists this alleged conspiracy is international. The paparazzi in London and Paris, he continues, are crawling with British intelligence. Another credible source, Steve Bergstrom, exposes why the media is no longer independent and has not been for a long time in his landmark internet book, Strategic Wealth. J.P. Morgan was educated in England and matriculated to America. The existing GSK, an abbreviation for Global Strongroom Keepers, financial services firm Morgan Stanley. Dean Witter continues to bear his name. Morgan testified into the Congressional Record 1917 to 1918 that the Global Monetary Trust, or the GSK system, reasoned that through the purchase of then controlling interests in America's 25 leading newspapers, they would eventually monopolise the American media. Reinforcing what Steve Bergstrom says, another independent investigative reporter, Mark Perkle, wrote on the same subject. "I keep hearing about the liberal press, and it just isn't true. The press is controlled by the big money conservatives. That's who owns the press. The big names in the press are the people who make millions a year. These are the people in control." According to Jordan Maxwell, David Rockefeller, at a meeting of the Trilateral Commission, of which he was the founder, in June 1991, reportedly made a speech thanking the media. "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we'd been subjected to the bright lights of publicity during those years, but the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries." Lord Northcliffe, British press baron, acknowledged, "News is what someone, somewhere, is trying to suppress. The rest is just advertising. With notable exceptions, brave independent reporters who uncover and report objective facts, as opposed to puppet editors, and most media anchormen women in their defence sincerely believe they are reporting objectively, Is this not true of our wag the dog type media today? Most of us who are busy getting on with our normal lives in the real world would be astounded to know we are toiling in an invisible mind prison for the benefit of an uncountable oligarchy. What was unveiled as these discoveries became more shocking was the stunning, demonstrable fact that this covert fraternity system had complete control over every detail of our lives. But don't despair, you can do something about it. You only have to follow the advice of the researchers given in the references. Until then, everything will be decided for you, from the price you pay from groceries to whether you work or not, and even, incredibly, what beliefs we adopt. Do you think that this last claim is overdramatic? You will discover the truth of it if you can honestly answer these simple questions. From where do your beliefs come from? Do you get them through what you read or hear in the media, or what you've been told by other authorities such as parents, peers, priests or historians? If so, where did they get their beliefs? Who do you think controls this information? Exactly. Can you now begin to allow some latitude for the fact that some of our dearest beliefs are fiction, and we are in reality bondage slaves who have been tricked into accepting beliefs that keep us in this state? The manipulation of history, which has been systematically perverted for centuries, is an important element of this parasitical system of control. Think about it, you don't need some high-fluting ology to understand what is going on. If we couldn't recall the past, we'd be useless vegetables. The contradiction is, if we could only open our eyes, we would discover the knowledge that would free us, that is right in front of our noses. The controllers of the system believe that they can never be exposed because they know it is only a relatively few people who have the inclination or time to put forward the effort to understand their strategy. They glory in their insidious power and are not modest about taking credit for their plotting, as one insider demonstrates. The power of the financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system has to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at infrequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which are themselves private corporations. Professor Carol Quigley of Georgetown University, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Times. Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor, continues, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the Communists act. In fact, this network, which we may have identified as a round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the Communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. There is so much anecdotal evidence about a worldwide conspiracy, it is almost like there is a conspiracy about a conspiracy. It is difficult to know what to put in and what to leave out, but it will do no harm to hear about the goals of the plutocracy from another commentator on our debt-based economy. Arthur Kitson wrote in 1932, this plea for a worldwide or international currency is a modern conception and has originated with a group of international money dealers who, to a large extent, control the money and credit of the world. This group has a settled policy, and all that is happening and has happened for the last few years throughout the world is according to a definite plan. The world's conquest. International finance controls practically all the channels by which the public are influenced, including history. Of course, can there be any doubt that there is an unaccountable cabal, secret government, managing every aspect of the system? Certainly many well-meaning and seemingly powerful people who are knowledgeable about the working of the system believe we need to become aware of our tragic situation. From the first American president, Andrew Jackson, to the Soviet Union's spiritual founder, Lenin, and Queen Elizabeth II, all are on record commenting on a dark and manipulative force stalking the backstage of geopolitics, playing a tune our so-called political leaders like puppets dance to. In 1789, the Marquis de Luchet warned France of the danger of the Illuminati, whose object was world domination. In consequence of the gigantic project, de Luchet foresees a series of calamities of which the end is lost in the darkness of time. In 1794, the Duke of Brunswick, in his manifesto to the German lodges, said, "A great sect arose, which, taking for its motto the good and happiness of man, worked in the darkness of the conspiracy to make the happiness of humanity a prey for itself. This sect is known to everyone, its brothers are known no less than its name. The plan they had formed for breaking all social ties and of destroying all order was revealed in their speeches and acts. Indomitable pride, thirst for power, such were the only motives of this sect. Their masters had nothing less in view than the thrones of the earth, and the government of the nations was to be directed by their nocturnal clubs. We, the people, are pawns in a game we do not even begin to understand. We inhabit a world we believe is familiar, but in reality it is nothing like we imagine it to be. It is necessary to realise that the great European houses, the more recognisable ones, are Orange. At the time of writing, the head of the House of Orange is Prince Bernard, who some believe to be a direct descendant of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Prince Bernard was, supposedly, founder of the political powerful and one of the conspiracy theorists' favourite hate groups, the Bilderbergers, named after Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland, where the first meeting took place in 1954. Rothschild, Schiff and Rockefeller together, they compose the trunk that nourishes the branches of a self-sustaining matrix we are trapped in. On the positive side, more and more people are discovering their own power and beginning to realise that this is only a relative few of these plutocratic families that are controlling our society. This could be one of the reasons there is so much talk about change and the feeling there is something badly wrong in the way society is going. It is hoped that before the end of our journey you will have fashioned your own thinking tools, if you have not done so already, to discover for yourself who the real rulers are, and that taking complete responsibility for your own power and happiness is your route map to freedom. There are many reasons why the secret government feel the need to control, and there are as many people trying to explain what these reasons are. In the end, it can be just about power, as one insightful writer believes. This follows an age-old truth. The poor seek security, the rich seek more money, but the real rulers seek power, because power puts them in control of everything that human beings seek. An editorial appeared in an English establishment broadsheet, The Guardian, on the 1st of October 1993, reporting on one of the vehicles the elite use. The Bilderberg Group, don't forget they expose themselves to scrutiny sometimes. The Bilderberg Group was founded in 1954, an outgrowth of various right-wing and anti-communist organisations such as the American Committee for a United Europe. It has connections with the CIA, OSS, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations and other shadow organisations. To this day, no one knows if this is a real name, since it goes to any lengths to avoid publicity and membership is highly secret. The minutes of the group's first meeting recorded that one of its primary interests was in involving an international order which would look beyond the present crisis, and this goal of creating a one-world government still seems to be its driving force. In 1989, it was alleged to have plotted the political assassination of Margaret Thatcher because of her refusal to yield British sovereignty of the European superstate. These then are some of the many ways the global system continues to dominate over extended periods of time undetected, using puppet leaders in politics and religion as tools, manipulating them through various semi-secret societies and institutions. US Supreme Court Judge Felix Frankfurter reveals this in 1952. The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. We can never hope to know all the avenues of control since they are way too complex, but some are more visible than others. For instance, before this chapter, how many of these groups have you ever heard of? The Club of Rome, the Bilderbergs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Round Table Groups, or the Creme de la Creme, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. At the end of this web, dominating and directing her offspring, sits the Black Widow. We will see later this is a fitting metaphor of secret societies, the supposedly obsolete Illuminati. Further down the chain of command are the Masonic and Orange orders. Although for the most part the Masons as an occult order are inactive, they are nevertheless useful tools of the Illuminati. There are of course the international bankers, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlement, the Global Clearing Bank, are not only the money masters, but they are also, we have discovered, international fraternal and semi-secret societies. Membership of these immensely powerful institutions consists of a select few at the peak of banking: business, politics, the legal system, academia and the media. It is within the covert setting that the future world events are planned, evaluated and strategies put in place to ensure anticipated outcomes. It is the destiny of man to control his own future. However, this cannot be accomplished by yet another violent revolution. The word revolution itself should give us a clue to this. To overthrow any particular puppet government. Robert Pirsig, in his best-selling book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, is unambiguous about this and provides other insights about the system. To speak of certain government and establishments as the system is to speak correctly, since these organisations are founded upon the same structural conceptual relationship as a motorcycle. They are sustained by structural relationships even when they have lost all their meaning and purpose. People arrive at a factory and perform a total meaningless task from 8 to 5 without question because the structure demands that it be that way. There's no villain, no mean guy who wants them to lead meaningless lives. It is just that structure. The system demands it, and it is one willing to take on the formidable task of changing the structure just because it is meaningless. But to tear down a factory, or to revolt against a government, or to avoid repair of a motorcycle because it is a system to attack effects rather than causes. And as long as attack is upon effects only, no change is possible. The true system, the real system, is our present constructions of systematic thought itself, rationality itself, and if a factory is torn down but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then the rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a systematic government, but the systematic patterns of thought that produced that government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves in the succeeding government. In fact, the only thing that changes after any revolution in any country is the label of the incumbent government. All governments and all religions remain subservient to the system and to the gatekeepers of that system. There is but one power system in Europe, and that is Rothschild, giving voice to the popular perception that this particular house holds sway over the fate of nations. The foregoing excerpts serve to demonstrate the mistake most researchers make in not identifying an arcane system as being primary, as opposed to the sinister cabal of houses that maintain and modify it and use bloodlines as a decoy. There is perhaps one revolution that has a chance of succeeding, and that is when each of us revolt against the phantasm that controls our mind and deceives us into believing we are already free. It is hard to fight an enemy who has an outpost in your head, writes author Sally Kempton, or perhaps the Rosicrucian axiom, not by revolution, but by evolution shall permanent change be brought about. May be surer, albeit slower way to proceed, but time is always against us. How do these shocking revelations that were repeatedly surfacing in my research on occult establishment's control help with our story of a lost race and the Battle of the Boyne? For the reason that is confirmed one of my central hypotheses about a secret world history that has its roots in what is now the island of Ireland. This seemed intentionally incredulous. That was until my own findings were confirmed by other more qualified and experienced authors and researchers who were discovering the same information. Conor McDarry was expounding theories about a secret society of ancient Ireland as far back as the 1920s. In his writings, he proposes, and he is not the only researcher to suggest this, that the Scots-Irish built the Egyptian pyramids. But it was, and is up to this day, also one of the most jealously guarded secrets of the High Church of England. Otherwise, this knowledge could not widely be known, as the evidence is so plain. It is only through a studied and agreed upon silence that the facts have been kept from becoming common knowledge. The Great Pyramid, and the group of which it is the premier, together with the temples of the Nile Valley, are the most convincing witnesses and testimonials, offering no chance for contradiction or uncertainty as to the accomplishments and genius of the Irish, or, as it is called in history, the Aryan race. In their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. To this country the Greeks applied the term ogygia, a term which was never given but to the very ancient, and it's from the Irish the Greeks traced their descent. Suppression of the hidden story of Western history can be put into a much wider context and a more academic one. Professor Anthony C. Sutton, a former research fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, USA, in his work America's Secret Establishment, observes, "It could be argued that our Western history is every bit as distorted, censored, and largely useless as that of Hitler's Germany or of the Soviet Union or Communist China. My understanding of how such a deception was possible, indeed surprisingly easy, and how it was continued for many eons was growing exponentially. The vague notions about its control that were swirling in my mind without any context at the start of my quest were, after years of research of the system, beginning to fit into an increasingly plausible and, paradoxically, incredible picture. Nothing could now surprise me. How wrong that thought would prove to be. All my ideas about my identity, the history of the Scots-Irish nation, and even how existence itself was organised, were taking on a completely new significance as seemingly diverse facts crystallised into a radical new chronology of history. The evidence that the battle at the Boyne was an important symbolic ritual battle was now widened to include the theory that the ancient landscape where it took place was where Western civilization was reborn after the Great Catastrophe. Compelling evidence for these ideas will be seen as the Boyne landscape at last gives up its ancient secrets. To challenge the establishment's version of history and to push boundaries to the edge of credibility, plausible reasons will be presented to show that these prehistoric peoples of Newgrange were an advanced scientific race. Explanations for the reason they deserted Boyne to wander the world, sojourning in different parts of the European continent and pushing south into Persia, modern Iran and Egypt will be covered in more detail in a later chapter. The theory has already been presented that the core tribes of the Indo-European race travelled southeast deep into the mountainous vastness of the Himalayas, India and Tibet, the reason being to safeguard the most secret of their teachings, which they subsequently released systematically in degrees over the ages through what became known as the mastery schools. Evidence has also been introduced that Indo-European people trekked as far south as Tibet. Proof for this was found in the discovery of the Caucasian Celtic mummies in the Taklamakan Desert, situated between Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tibet. Arthur Kemp confirms this saga in his epic book, March of the Titans, History of the White Race, which also traces in detail the history of the Indo-European tribes. In this incredible classic, which of course you won't find in any bookshop, Kemp parallels our journey and poses similar questions as to the origins of our civilization, but what answers them from a wholly racial perspective. After eons of time and many adventures, the relatively modern descendants of that race left Newgrange to journey south, eventually turned north again on their long, tortuous trek back to their home. They arrived at different times, or as mundane history records, different waves, in what the Romans called the Blessed Isles. Their historical travels have been preserved in symbolism and theatrically revealed in the ritual that William and James performed in Boyne. Later we will observe from our newly constructed vantage point the orange parades in Belfast accurately reenact the trek taken by this long forgotten race in their migration form and return to their ancient island home. The subterfuge that keeps the memory of this race alive could well indicate there are people within the controlling elite and working on behalf of humanity who are preserving the memory of their ancestors' achievements. They use symbolism because, unlike paper, it cannot be burned, and unlike stone, cannot be defaced, but unfortunately it can and has been manipulated. As our irrefutable facts about our true history continue to emerge, any remaining scales of scepticism fell from my eyes. The path we found taxing earlier was now much easier to travel. That there was, and is a power-crazed elite who seems to be on a final feeding frenzy and which assumes various guises and names, was now beyond doubt. They have been identified as a secret government, parasitical elite, global strongroom keepers, international bankers, the New World Order, and the international community, or my favourite from an acquaintance, greedy bastards. This secretive cabal have manipulated everything of historical significance from the obscure dawning of British history for purposes which are still not quite clear, but will become so as we continue to construct our puzzle picture. We have yet to experience the final effects of their covert agenda. However, looking at the state of our world as in at the present time, we must be at its closing stages. Marshall McLuhan, in his Oracle of the Electronic Age, said, "We look at the present through a rear-view mirror, which is to say their plans are always further along than we think. We have been cautioned by Dr. Wallace through powerful new metaphors about the agenda of what he calls the ugly few, pulling them into the light as no one has before." American author Thomas Pynchon demonstrates clever insight of how massive manipulations can go undetected when he said, "If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they won't worry about the answers." Examples of a carefully laid deceit are found in the writings of some conspiracy researchers who believe the beings that comprise the oligarchy have lost that quality which defines us as human beings. Some take the non-human metaphor of to extreme boundaries, exposing this whole area of research to ridicule, which must lead to questions about their motives. One researcher in particular tests people's credulity to the full in identifying these humanoids as a shape-shifting alien reptilian race. Most rational people would, it is my suspicion, find these concepts far too incredible, particularly as it involves the British royal family. No matter what the truth is about this house is. David Icke is a best-selling author and an exceptional public speaker. He can also be admired for his innovative approach to research. Do not be deterred by the complaint media's portrayal of him as a conspiracy nutter. Read his intriguing, if incredible, research and, as always, decide for yourself. Is he informant or misinforming? Are unwary authors like Icke being used by the elite? To be fair, this criticism could be levelled at any author in the vanguard of difficult cutting-edge research. Don't forget, we live in an upside-down world where words are used to mean anything. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I chose it to mean, neither more nor less. We find instances of this irrationally reflected in the modern world, expressed in what we can only be called Clinton speak. When erstwhile President Bill Clinton was being quizzed about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, he replied, "It depends on what you mean by is." Language, or more precisely linguistics, is more of the major tools of control, which makes it an obligatory study by anyone who desires to understand the illusion we inhabit. The basic tool for the manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words, wrote the late science fiction writer Philip Dick, 1928-82. And he goes on to say, if you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use the words. Marshall McLuhan and his son Eric named in their books Laws of Media these complicated techniques for world control, synchronistic linguistics. Silver-tongued quislings like Clinton, Blair and other high-level global politicians, in reality systematic puppets, are strategically placed to control aspects of the deception and to keep us endlessly herded and perplexed. They know the value of keeping the useless eaters, as one of the elite generally described the so-called masses, in conflict with each other. Divide and rule is the active axiom. Ireland is a good example, although the same template has been used throughout history in most countries. The use of historical and mythological events, like the Battle of the Boyne, is used to further an agenda we are, so far, ignorant of. As a aside, the so-called Irish peace process won't work. It was never meant to, and never will in its present form. 2003. It's just another facet of the agenda put forward to confuse. This will become clear as our story develops. Difficult as it is to believe, the controllers of the system plan outcomes hundreds of years in advance. Nevertheless, as we proceed, we will come to understand this as a living fact. Steve Bergstrom explains how this works in practice by brilliantly exposing the complexities of the global banking system. He illustrates how the precise mathematical system extracts wealth from individuals for the benefit of the few at the top of a metaphorical pyramid and proposes alternative methods of personal financial management. Most references that are given propose alternatives to the system. There is always another way, and it would be to your benefit to explore them. Steve discloses secrets in his online book Strategic Wealth, will not find anywhere else. He exposes the plans of the strong room keepers as revealed when one of the agents was asked in 1902 to specify the length of time needed to conclude their plan. He replied, "For centuries we have worked and planned, and though we are closer than ever to our goal, we practice methodical steps so that we will not be discovered. But our time approaches and all should be complete in 100 years. Wake up, the Matrix almost has you." The Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant, in his primarily articles for perpetual peace, associates the fractional reserve banking system and the so-called business cycles with war. For a practical example of the following quote, think about what happened to the financial system in Argentina in recent years when they refused to follow the controller's orders. A credit system which grows beyond sight and which is yet a safe debt for the present requirements, because all of the creditors do not require payment at one time, constitutes a dangerous money power. This ingenious invention of a commercial people, England, in this century is dangerous because it is a war treasure which exceeds the treasures of all the other states. It cannot be exhausted except by default of taxes, which is inevitable, though it can be long delayed by the stimulus to trade which occurs through the reaction of credit on industry and commerce. It follows that to forbid this credit system must be a preliminary article of a perpetual peace, all the more because it must eventually entangle many innocent states in the inevitable bankruptcy and openly harm them. Is there something special about Ireland that has attracted the attention of the powercrats? Is there something unique, some mystery for it being chosen as the setting for a momentous historical event? Perhaps, as already proposed, all Western history was usurped. But if you are not already convinced that Ireland is indeed special, you may be before we finish our journey. We must understand that there has been heavy censorship of this mythological battle ritual, the esoteric aspects of it being suppressed because it did not suit the elite's agenda. Any event that has the potential to bring peace is outlawed. How historical suppression works within this matrix is hinted in it at the closing scene of the film Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, which shows the recovered Ark of the Covenant being buried in an enormous and anonymous warehouse. Was Spielberg, who has a reputation amongst conspiracy theorists of being another insider, teasing us? Was he pointing us to the basement of the Smithsonian Institution, the world's largest museum complex in Washington, D.C.? Do the controllers play games with us because the clues they give continually point us in the wrong directions? Could it be they are afraid of losing their grip over us if we ever discover the truth of our history? They know this exposes their games and releases us to discover who and what we really are. As our story unfolds, you will see the evidence for this, but there is a point that requires clarification before we proceed in our attempt to unravel these tangled strands of history. No single race of people or any one country is fundamentally superior to any other, as some evilly misguided dictators of the past have deceived people into believing, with catastrophic consequences. Races, like bloodlines, are only important for the purpose of manipulation and control. That is to say, the Aryans were not some sort of super race or demigods. Nevertheless, that should not stop us giving credit where credit is due when investigating this intriguing race's chronology. Perhaps this account of them could, if viewed with a clear mind, help restore the Aryans' reputation as a benevolent force that helped rebuild Western civilization after the Great Catastrophe. Let's not forget that anything the elite want to destroy, they first demonize. In our global village, we have discovered that people are fundamentally of the same nature. If there is any difference at all, it is only exposure to education. We know, for example, if a child from the third world is exposed to modern education, and no matter how primitive the society that child comes from, he or she will have the same potential as a child from a more advanced society, genetics notwithstanding. Winston Churchill, in another quote from the Illustrated Sunday Herald, said, "There are all sorts of men, good, bad, and, for the most part, indifferent, in every country and in every race. Nothing is more wrong than to deny an individual, because of race or origin, his right to be judged on his personal merits and conduct." Churchill also knew that all races and individuals are subject to the matrix of control that is endemic to the civilization, and that includes education. To confirm that knowledge of the system, and the predicament it leaves us in is widespread, and to integrate the above mentioned an extract from the works of Carlos Castena is well worth a perusal. In his last book, The Active Side of Infinity, he engages in the following metaphorical exchanges with his teacher, Don Juan. Don Juan Matas introduced Carlos to the sorcerer's topic of topics, the existence of a dark predatory force that has enslaved humanity in order to farm it as a food source. He calls this force or entity the flyer, describing it as a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. They took over because we are food for them, and they squeeze us mercilessly because we are their sustenance. Just as we rear chickens in chicken coops, Galeneros, the predator, rear us in human coops, Humaneros. Therefore, their food is always available to them. When Don Juan states all this flatly to Carlos as an energetic fact, Carlos's reaction is uncannily similar to that of Neo in the Matrix, fallen Morpheus, all almost identical revelations. Neo says, No, I don't believe it. Let me out of here. Carlos describes his own reaction. No, I heard myself saying, this is absurd. What are you saying is monstrous. It simply can't be true. Don Juan asks simply, why not? Because it infuriates you? Morpheus asked Neo a similar question. Is it so hard to believe? Well, is it? Don Juan explains. Sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our systems of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our hopes and expectations and dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetousness, greed, cowardice. It is the predators who make us complacent, routinely egomaniacal, in order to keep us obedient and meek and weak. The predators engaged themselves in a stupendous maneuver. They gave us their mind. Through the mind which, after all, is their mind, the predators inject into the lives of human beings whatever is convenient for them. Don Juan asked Carlos to observe how every human on this earth seems to have exactly the same reactions, the same thoughts, the same feelings. They seem to respond in more or less the same way to the same stimuli. This sums up, conceptually, the power of the system that dominates our minds and consequently our world. If you return to your beliefs and gave them some thought with these ideas in mind, you may begin to question the validity of their source and true purpose. Returning to our study of the Aryan Phoenicians and their predecessors, we discovered, and more evidence for this will be forthcoming, were the inheritors of an advanced knowledge from a race that has been intentionally edited out of history. This helps put into context the importance of Ireland because it was one of the major domiciles. MacDarry says of them, there is no mistaking the monuments left by the Irish, who were once the rulers and masters of the whole earth. Their rule embraced all countries. It was worldwide. The knowledge they possessed could be the reason they already knew the principles of tolerance and understanding when they first appear in history. They taught religious and scientific ethics wherever they travelled, and they journeyed over the face of the continents of the world, having a civilizing effect on all the peoples they contacted. Regrettably, this was not to last. Even in relatively modern times, Ireland has a reputation, a tradition of learning and teaching. Perhaps this is why it is known as the island of saints and scholars. They were simply carrying on the tradition of the early inhabitants of the Blessed Isles. Blessed, probably because they were all that was spared of the original island when the cataclysm struck. Okay, people, I think I'm going to leave it there for today and make a part 2 of the Parasitical Elites chapter. It's a long read, this one. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Very interesting. So far in the book, we've covered the fact that the Battle of the Boyne between William and James could have been just a ceremony, more of a ceremony. And this has actually changed the history of Ireland, which, if that's true, and I heard that apparently guys with metal detectors have searched the Boyne area and there's not even a shot, a ball bearing, a cannonball, anything Because back then they had guns and belts and buckles, and there's not a trace of any kind of battle. So he could be onto something there, and he's covered the control, the banking elites. It's quite an interesting book. It's not just about Ireland. It's about every aspect, the controlling powers, and it's a nice angle he's gone at. I've got to say, I like it. Anyway, people, we have finished on page, let's see, 72. So we'll pick it up from there in the next video. Right, people, I hope you enjoyed that. Have a nice weekend, and I'll see you in the grey area with VB later on. Cheers.